What does the relationship between sunrise time and latitude, plus the number of LEDs per meter on an LED strip, have to do with memory size calculation? Interesting question. Not just that, but it is actually important if you manage to design your own world map complicated enough. And this is just what I did. Hello everybody, this is Volkans, and I have a new DIY project.
Last year I built a drywall shelf in our living room. At that time, the area above the door was left empty. The idea was to put a world map with LED backlight there. You can find such maps all over the internet, no big deal. But there is something that they all lack, and that is
a backlight color scheme that depends on the local time and the date. That means deep blue for areas where there is night, orange where there is sunrise, pink where there is sunset, and so on. Now this may sound complicated. It is complicated, but it can be done with a bit of brain work and calculation, even using an Arduino as central unit. To be honest, the idea was not mine. The credit goes to my best friend Mikey. So Mikey, thank you for everything. All the calculations that follow rely on the idea that the Earth is round and orbits the Sun. If you think otherwise, then this video may not be your thing. Today I will explain the theory, plus the design of the circuit and the software. The video about the actual build process will follow soon. At least that's the plan. The main problem is that the time when the sun rises and sets depends on which day of the year it is and what latitude we are on. Actually, it also depends on the longitude, but we are going to neglect this dependency as it is too small compared to other details of the model that we are going to build. Before we start to calculate, let's have a short visualization of the phenomenon.
I set up a simplified model of the Earth orbiting the Sun in Blender. Each frame of the video covers 15 minutes, and to keep the video short, 1 year consists of only 12 days, which results in a total of 1152 frames, about 45 seconds of video. I placed 8 cameras on the model, onto the same longitude, from the North Pole to the South Pole, all of them looking east. To have a blue sky during daytime in the simulation, I placed the hemisphere between the Earth and the Sun, with the material set to volume scatter. This is by far not a perfect representation, but it does the job, and I'm not an expert in Blender anyway.
I rendered all 9000 frames and combined them with a small Python program, and the result is this. You can observe a lot of interesting details even in this simple model.
Not just that the sunrise time really depends on the latitude, but also that the path of the sun is much steeper near the equator. And of course the 6-month-long daylight around the poles, with the sun just going around in circles.
So the main question is how to make this work using an Arduino and LED strips. For the sake of simplicity, I will not talk about the clock. Let's just assume that we know the date and the local time, in my case, around Budapest.
Local time is a bit ambiguous in this context. Usually, local time refers to what your watch shows. But the sun does not rise at the same time in Paris and in Budapest. The difference is more than an hour, although they are in the same time zone.
And for our model, this is what matters. If I know the exact sunrise time for Budapest, I can calculate the sunrise time for Paris, based on the difference in longitude and taking the latitude of Paris into consideration. The mathematics of sunrise and sunset time calculation is extremely complex. I found an Excel sheet on the internet that does the job, and I didn't even try to understand how. But as a wise man once said, don't believe in wonders, rely on them. In this case, it is enough that we can export the result of the calculations. And here we dive into some mathematics.
My map will not show Antarctica. This means that the southmost point will be in Chile at 55 degrees south, and the northmost point will be in Greenland at 85 degrees north. The total size will be 900 by 600 millimeters, but the active area will only be 490 millimeters tall. The most important calculation is resolution. The LED strip has 144 LEDs per meter. This means that two neighboring LEDs are 11 minutes apart at this scale. As a consequence, it is pointless to store time data with a resolution of 1 minute. The map will not be able to show it anyway. So I decided to store sunrise and sunset times as one single byte. Vertical resolution will be 1 degree of latitude. With this, we can calculate that a 64 kilobyte chip is required for each data table. Interestingly, but not so much surprisingly, noontime, when the sun is at the highest point during the day, does not depend on the latitude. So, to store noontimes, much less storage space is required. And so the data structure is defined. I wrote a simple Visual Basic macro that exports the time data from the Excel sheet in the specified format. To make the binary data file somewhat readable, it is useful to have the headers and footers in ASCII. The circuit diagram is quite simple. Date and time will be received via the serial port. Other than the mentioned EEPROM chips and the LED strip, I added a photoresistor so that brightness can be adjusted based on environment lighting.
Okay, now we have defined the data format based on which we will make the calculations. But still, there are a lot of details to be considered and decisions to be made.
As I referred to at the beginning, the day can be split into multiple parts, but we only store 3 time values. The rest must be calculated.
To start off, we must make a tough decision. Should it be astronomically correct or visually appealing? It should look cool. To make it look cool, we must be very careful when setting the length of the phases. As you remember, time resolution is 11 minutes, so anything shorter than that may just fall into the pit between two LEDs. First of all, I decided that the noon phase will be considered 45 minutes long to make it clearly distinguishable.
The length of dawn, sunrise, sunset and dusk depend on the latitude and the length of the night. Longer nights mean that the sun rises and sets at a lower angle, so these phases last longer. I decided to consider only the latitude. At constant length, on shorter days these phases will make up a larger part of the daytime anyway. These periods, including noon, may appear a bit too long at first glance, but they will be shown as color gradients, so visually they will be narrower. The algorithm to calculate the color will look like this. Note that this is still a simplified flowchart, as it does not show special cases, like when the sunrise phase would be longer than the difference between noon and sunrise time. These exceptions must also be handled.
The flowchart contains a step, Read LED Coordinates. To be able to perform this simple step, the world map must already be assembled. Let me explain why.
This figure shows the structure of the map. The blue rectangles represent the LEDs. The strip will be glued to the core so that the LEDs themselves are not visible.
It is almost impossible to tell the location of the LEDs precisely in advance, so it must be determined when the LED strip is in place.
More accurately, it is not the position of the LEDs that must be determined, but the position of the corresponding point of the continent contour. These are marked with red circles in the figure.
These coordinates must be determined individually and stored for each LED. In this case, resolution matters, so I decided to measure with millimeter accuracy.
Let's see all that summed up in a sample calculation. Assume we have an LED at Los Angeles. The coordinates from the top left corner are measured and stored in the Arduino code. From these numbers, we can calculate the latitude and the time shift compared to Budapest. The central clock provides the date and the Budapest local time. Sunrise and sunset time data tables were created based on Budapest longitude and local time. So what we need to do is to shift everything according to the delta in longitude between Budapest and Los Angeles. Plus, we must take the latitude dependency into consideration. Once we have identified which phase of the day we have in Los Angeles, we can calculate the current color to show. Note that although sunrise time is stored as a single byte with a resolution of 5 minutes, the color will change with a 1-minute resolution according to the time data provided by the clock.
And that covers the theory of how to build a world map with local time-dependent backlight. I will start the construction tomorrow and come back with the results as soon as the map is in place. Until then, happy crafting and see you soon!